The 10,003rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian Question. The agenda is adopted. I would like to warmly welcome the Secretary-General, distinguished President, ministers, and other high-level representatives present in the Security Council chamber. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Egypt, Kuwait, Norway, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. I propose that the Council invite permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations to participate in the meeting in accordance with the Provisional Rules of Procedure and the previous practice in this regard. There being no objection, it is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following to participate in this meeting: His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abul Hayt, Secretary-General of the League of Arab States, and Her Excellency Ms. Kaya Kallas, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and Vice President of the European Commission. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to the Secretary-General, His Excellency Mr. António Guterres.
Mr. President, Excellencies, we are confronting one of the darkest chapters of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Nearly 2 years after the horrific Hamas terror attacks of 7 October and the devastating Israeli military response that followed, the violence has only deepened across the occupied Palestinian territory, with grave threats to regional and global peace and security. The Israeli military onslaught in Gaza City is compounding an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Countless Palestinian civilians and the remaining hostages are trapped under relentless bombardment and deprived of food, water, electricity, and medicine. Famine is a reality, with the population constantly forced to move and being starved. To call this situation untenable and morally indefensible does not begin to capture the scale of human suffering. I have repeatedly appealed for an immediate permanent ceasefire, the immediate unconditional release of all hostages, and the immediate unconditional and unhindered humanitarian access. UN resolutions continue to be ignored, international humanitarian law violated, impunity prevails, and our collective credibility is being undermined. The violence is spreading from Gaza into the occupied West Bank and beyond, including several countries in the region and recently even Qatar. Efforts to secure a ceasefire and hostage release deal led by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States suffered a serious blow on 9 September. The Israeli attack was not only a violation of Qatar's sovereignty and territorial integrity, It also threatened the very norms and mechanisms we rely on for diplomacy and conflict resolution. Excellencies, the viability of a two-state solution is steadily eroding, now reaching its most critical level in more than a generation. Relentless settlement expansion, de facto annexation, forced displacement. Cycles of deadly violence, including by extremist settlers, have entrenched an unlawful Israeli occupation and pushed us perilously close to a point of no return. Israel's recent approval of settlement construction in the EU1 area is especially alarming. If implemented, it would sever the occupied West Bank, sever the occupied West Bank, destroying the territorial contiguity of a Palestinian state. Israeli settlements are not just a political issue, they are a flagrant violation of international law. At the same time, the Palestinian Authority is facing an existential crisis. Fiscal, political, and institutional pressures are undermining its ability to function. Israel's withholding of clearance revenues, the suffocation of the Palestinian economy, and the sharp decline in donor aid have left the Palestinian Authority unable to pay salaries or deliver basic services. Urgent international support, financial and political, is needed to stabilize the Palestinian Authority and preserve its viability as a partner for peace. And yet, amid the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerged yesterday with the resumption of the high-level international conference on a two-state solution. I commend France and Saudi Arabia for co-chairing this important meeting and for helping to reignite political momentum. I welcome the recognition of Palestinian statehood by many more countries, including permanent members of the Council, France and the United Kingdom. This is the clearest path to a two-state solution. Israel, and an independent, sovereign, democratic, viable and contiguous state of Palestine, living side by side in peace and security on the pre-1967 lines, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states, based on international law and UN resolutions. We must seize this momentum. The so-called day after in Gaza must be anchored in international law, reject any form of ethnic cleansing, and have a clear political horizon towards a viable two-state solution. As I said to the General Assembly this morning, we must urgently reverse the dangerous trends on the ground. Relentless settler expansion and violence and the looming threat of annexation must stop. The calls of the International Court of Justice must be heeded, including for Israel to immediately cease settlement activities and end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. The illegal occupation must end. And we must support Palestinian institutions politically and financially to carry out essential reforms and ensure fiscal stability. Excellences, on ne bâtira jamais une paix juste et durable en ajoutant de la violence à la violence. La paix exige un engagement collectif en faveur de la diplomatie, du droit international et de la dignité de chaque être humain. Il incombe au Conseil de sécurité de prendre les mesures nécessaires et il incombe à chaque membre du Conseil d'assumer ses responsabilités. Ne laissons pas cette mince occasion nous échapper et je vous remercie.
I thank the Secretary-General for his briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. I thank again the Secretary-General for his briefing. It is yet another stark reminder that the situation in Gaza stands as one of the gravest challenges to international peace and security. The immense scale of human suffering and the implications for regional stability demand our urgent and united attention. This is not an abstract challenge, but measured in lives lost every day. Nearly 2 years have passed since Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7, 2023. In that time, more than 64,000 people have been killed. The humanitarian crisis worsens each day, with people in Gaza, particularly women, children, and other vulnerable groups facing constant threats to their lives and safety. Equally troubling is the famine now unfolding in Gaza. According to the recent IPC report, 500,000 people are already facing famine. The crisis is projected to spread to Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis in the coming weeks. We must prevent any further devastation for civilians already in desperate conditions. Safe, sustained, and unimpeded humanitarian access must be guaranteed without any further delay. We call for the immediate lifting of all restrictions on the entry and distribution of humanitarian assistance. Excellencies, the Republic of Korea is deeply alarmed by Israel's ground operation to seize control of Gaza City, which risks further exacerbating an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. We are also gravely concerned that its decision to resume construction in the E1 settlement area would threaten to isolate Palestinian communities in the area. Given the dire situation, upholding international law, in particular international humanitarian law, is imperative. These rules are not aspirational ideals, but binding obligations designed to safeguard human dignity even in the darkest moments of conflict. We urge all parties to comply fully with these principles. In this difficult context, the Republic of Korea remains gravely concerned about Israel's recent attack in Qatari territory. This act is unacceptable. It not only violates the territorial sovereignty of the state of Qatar, one of the key mediating countries, but also jeopardizes ongoing negotiations to achieve an immediate ceasefire and secure the release of all hostages held by Hamas. We reaffirm our full support for the tireless mediation efforts of the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. We commend the unwavering commitment of Qatar's diplomatic mediation, which remains indispensable to ending the cycle of violence and creating a pathway toward stability. The Republic of Korea also reiterates its steadfast call for an immediate ceasefire and the unconditional release of all hostages. Securing their freedom, together with establishing a permanent and fully respected ceasefire, are indispensable steps towards a just and lasting peace. Excellencies, the Republic of Korea deeply understands the Palestinian people's aspiration to establish their own state. We believe that the two-state solution is the only viable pathway to resolve the Israel-Palestinian issue and to build lasting peace. The Korean government will continue to play its due role in the international community's growing efforts to build peace and stability in the region based on the two-state solution. Taking all considerations into account, Korea is committed to recognizing Palestinian statehood at a time when it would be genuinely conducive to realizing the two-state solution. As we deliberate today, let us not lose sight of our common goal, a Middle East where peoples of all walks of life can coexist in peace, security, and prosperity. Korea stands ready to contribute to alleviating civilian suffering, upholding the principles of international law, and helping to lay the firm foundations of a just and enduring peace for all. I now resume my functions as the President of the Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mohammed Ishaq Dar, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I wish to express my gratitude to you, Mr. President, for convening this meeting. Welcome the participation of all distinguished ministers joining this important discussion today. I also thank Secretary General for his valuable briefing and thoughtful remarks. The Secretary General's voice has always been of wisdom and compassion in Palestine and beyond. To promote peace and alleviate human sufferings, we salute this dedication and devotion, Mr. Secretary General. Mr. President, we meet today in the shadow of a profound and deeply troubling tragedy. The Palestinian people are enduring unimaginable suffering, an unbearable daily toll of human lives, the destruction of homes and neighborhoods, and the obliteration of essential infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, and markets lie in ruins. Roads and utilities have been shattered. The very fabric of society has torn apart. Over 64,000 lives have been lost, and over 100,000 have been injured. These are not mere statistics. They were grieving mothers, anguished fathers, suffering children, and revered elders. The devastation is immense. The grief is immeasurable. The world must not remain silent. The humanitarian situation in Gaza has reached catastrophic proportions. Starvation grips the population, and famine has taken hold. According to the latest Integrated Food Security Phase Classification (IPC) analysis, famine is now a reality in Gaza City, putting over 500,000 people at grave risk. In Khan Yunis and Deir al-Bala, famine looms imminently, threatening countless more lives. The ongoing military operations in Gaza City inflict a relentless toll. Dozens of Palestinians are killed each day, entire families displaced, and communities torn apart. Already, 300,000 people have been uprooted, and nearly 1 million face imminent displacement. The roar of fighter jets, the plumes of smoke from tank fire, and the collapse of buildings. What must this relentless violence mean for women, children, and the most vulnerable? And what of the hostages caught in the crossfire, whose lives hang in the balance? Mr. President, in the West Bank, illegal settlement expansion continues unabated. The latest E1 plan is grave violation of international law and relevant UN resolutions, as well as a stark manifestation of settler colonialism in the 21st century, a blow to the two-state solution. Mr. President, the time for action is upon us. Pakistan calls for the following urgent and concrete measures. 1. An immediate, unconditional and permanent ceasefire to halt the bloodshed and prevent further loss of lives. 2. Full unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza and the immediate lifting of the blockade to allow life-saving aid to reach those who are in need. 3. A categoric end to any forced displacement of Palestinians from their lands, while upholding the right of return for refugees in accordance with the international law and establishing an international protection mechanism. And Mr. President, Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering support for the Palestinian people in their just struggle for dignity, justice, and self-determination through the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and contiguous Palestinian state on pre-1967 borders with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Pakistan welcomes the two-state solution conference chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We also commend the recent recognitions of the State of Palestine by numerous member states, a step that reflects adherence to justice and the principle of international law. Pakistan had the honor to be among the first few countries to recognize the State of Palestine following the Declaration of Independence in 1988. This positive momentum must be sustained with resolute determination, seriousness of purpose, and an unwavering commitment to achieving a just and lasting solution. Mr. President, the people of Palestine are facing a crisis of historic proportion. Their suffering is a stain on our collective conscience. Gaza has become a graveyard for the humanity as well as for the global conscience. We call upon the Security Council and the broader international community to act decisively, to uphold human dignity, to ensure accountability and deliver justice. The time for words has passed. The time for action is now. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Dar for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Tanya Fayon, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Slovenia.
President, and I thank the Secretary-General for his briefing and his personal commitment to this issue. Mr. President, upon entering the UN Security Council, Slovenia felt the heavy weight of responsibility of this council to uphold international peace and security, a weight that translates to upholding international law and rejecting double standards, choosing global benefit over national interests, being ready for difficult conversations with partners and instead of silence. Everyone who enters this Security Council or is a permanent member of this body should know that membership entails a responsibility to act. And it does not matter whether a threat to peace and security is unfolding in Ukraine or in Gaza. In both of these conflicts, international law is disregarded blatantly and red lines crossed persistently. Excellencies, this year we again witnessed immense numbers of deaths among civilians in armed conflicts, with many of them being women and children, lives shattered by starvation and displacement. Let us be reminded we have built a system that should prevent atrocities, and we promised a never again. Yet what we saw this year was a Security Council paralyzed by disrespect of this Council's resolutions and disregard of decisions of international courts. Colleagues, we should stand up to this. When politicians facing charges for war crimes and crimes against humanity are walking free, while judges are put under sanctions, we cannot afford to remain silent without becoming complacent. Let me be clear, when all rules and obligations of the international system we had constructed fail, this itself is a threat to international peace and security. Mr. President, Gaza has become a textbook example of failure of international community. It has become a place in which people dread the nightfall and fear what a new day will bring. Gaza has become the deadliest place for children, the deadliest place for humanitarian and medical workers, and the deadliest place for journalists. The place of first ever proclaimed famine in the Middle East, marked by continuous offensives and strikes against hospitals, schools, homes, shelters, and holy places. It is defined by death and despair, and where hostages suffer and civilians count heartbeats left. Gaza is a man-made catastrophe which is live-streamed across the globe and sustained by those acting in contradiction to everything we stand for. And Mr. President, existence of reasonable grounds to conclude or finding that acts may amount to genocide are threat to international peace and security. We commend the work of the judicial and investigative mechanisms, the ICG, the ICC, and the Commission of Inquiry, particularly for its latest report for sounding the alarm. It is not on us to question their findings, it is on us to act on them. And demands of a large majority of international community are not performative diplomacy. Calls for a ceasefire, irreversible political steps, and even simple expressions of solidarity are not stage-managed acts. They paint a dark picture of international community in despair. Understanding that never again has become a failed promise. And Mr. President, the two-state solution is equally in need of concrete and irreversible action. I welcome the new wave of countries recognizing the state of Palestine, and I call on others to take bold steps to recognize Palestine and normalize ties with both states. We must step up to prevent further disintegration of this vision and to counter occupation and annexation, forced displacement, human rights violations, and terrorism and extremism. Slovenia firmly supports the role of United Nations, including UNRWA, in addressing the ongoing crisis and in paving way to the two-state solution, and of the Palestinian Authority in carrying out reform and assuming full political ownership in the state of Palestine. And I appeal to all of us, do not let the future of Israeli people be defined by terrorism and violence. Do not let the future of Palestinian people be defined by occupation and perpetual human rights violations. And I appeal to you, do not let our collective future to be defined by the stain of the Gaza genocide. Act now. There is no bigger threat to international peace and security than a cycle of violence perpetrated by continuous fear, everlasting hate, and uncertain future. The stories of children starved to death, a threat of a population displaced, and a territory in fear should be all we need for us to understand that immediate, permanent, and unconditional ceasefire is now. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Fayon for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad, and African Affairs of Algeria.
أشكركم السيد الرئيس على تنظيم هذه الجلسة تجاوباً مع الطلب الذي تقدمت به مجموعة الدول الإسلامية في مجلسنا هذا. كما أشكر الأمين العام السيد أنطونيو غوتيريش على إحاطته القيمة والملمة بالتطورات الأخيرة في منطقة الشرق الأوسط. لقد أضحت هذه المنطقة رديفة للخراب والدمار، رديفة للظلم والإرهاب، ورديفة للإجرام في أقصى صوره وتجلياته. كيف لا وهي المنطقة التي ذاقت من هذه الأهوال كلها ما لم يذقه غيرها طيلة عقود متعاقبة من الأزمنة والدهور. دون أي مبالغة أو مزايدة، ودون أي نعت أو توصيف، تتحدث الأوضاع بنفسها عن نفسها، سواء تعلق الأمر بالقضية الفلسطينية تحديداً أو بالمشهد الإقليمي شرق المتوسط عموماً. فعلى الصعيد الفلسطيني لم يعد هناك أي مجال للإنكار بأن ما تتعرض له غزة منذ ما يقرب العامين هي حرب إبادة كاملة ومتكاملة الأرض، بعد أن أكدت ذلك لجنة التحقيق الأممية. ولم يعد هناك أي مجال للجدال حول خطر المجاعة في غزة بعد أن قامت منظمتنا هاته بتأكيد هذه الحالة والإعلان عنها بصفة رسمية. ولم يعد هناك أي مجال للتأويل حول مخططات التهجير وإعادة احتلال وضم غزة والضفة الغربية بعد أن شرع الاحتلال الإسرائيلي في تنفيذ هذه المخططات وتفعيلها جهراً وعلناً. أما على الصعيد المنطقة عامة، فمجال الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية مفتوح على مصراعيه: عدوان إسرائيلي على اليمن، ثم عدوان إسرائيلي على لبنان، ثم عدوان إسرائيلي على سوريا، ثم عدوان إسرائيلي على إيران، ومنذ أيام قلائل خلت عدوان إسرائيلي آخر على دولة قطر. ولا يخفى على أحد منا أن هذه القائمة مؤهلة للامتداد والاتساع في أعقاب التهديدات التي طالت ولا تزال تطال دولا أخرى في المنطقة. هذا هو الواقع المجحف والمأساوي الذي يسعى الاحتلال الإسرائيلي لتكريسه، وهو يسارع الزمن بفتح جبهات العدوان الجبهة تلو الجبهة. إن مجلسنا هذا لم يعد بحاجة لفك الألغاز بعد أن صار الاحتلال الإسرائيلي ذاته يجاهر بمآرب على رؤوس الأشهاد. فالاحتلال الإسرائيلي يسبو أولا للقضاء على أي أفق من آفاق قيام الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة والسيدة، ليس على الأرض فحسب، بل حتى في العقول والأذهان إن استطاع إلى ذلك سبيلا. والاحتلال الإسرائيلي يصبو ثاني لإعادة رسم الحدود في المنطقة على مقاس مخايله ووفق أهوائه وأوهامه، مستندا في ذلك إلى أخطر خرافة من خرافاته الزائفة، ألا وهي خرافة إسرائيل الكبرى. والاحتلال الإسرائيلي يصبو ثالثا وأخيرا إلى تكريس هيمنته المطلقة على المنطقة وتنصيب نفسه الآمر والناهي فيها، يعتدي على من شاء وقت ما شاء وكيف ما شاء. لا القانون الدولي يهمه ولا الميثاق الأممي يكترث له، ولا حتى أبسط القواعد والأعراف التي تمت بصلة للتعايش المتمدن والمتحضر. أبعد هذا كله يجرؤ الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الترويج لباطله المغرضة بأن الفلسطينيين يريدون إقصاءه، وهو ينكر حقهم في الوجود وحقهم في الحياة وحقهم في بناء دولتهم المستقلة والسيدة. أبعد هذا كله يتجرأ الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على التسويق لدعاياته الزائفة بأنه وحيد محاط بأعداء يرومون بتدميره، وهو الذي لم يسلم من تجبره وتسلطه أي دولة من دول المنطقة. أبعد هذا كله يقدم الاحتلال الإسرائيلي على وصف ذاته بقلعة الديمقراطية وسيادة القانون في المنطقة، وهو الذي أثبت للعالم أجمع أنه أكبر خطر على الحق والقانون، وأشد خطر على أمن واستقرار المنطقة، وأعظم خطر على السلم والأمن الدوليين. إن المآسي والأهوال التي تتكبدها منطقة الشرق الأوسط اليوم تفرض علينا إعادة طرح مسألة السلم والأمن فيها على أصولها الحقة، ومن منظور شامل لا يقبل التجزئة أو التقسيم. فمسألة الأمن في الشرق الأوسط ليست وليدة أحداث 7 أكتوبر 2023 حتى يتم ربطها بهذا التاريخ واختزالها فيه إجحافاً وتجاوزاً وتحيزاً. تاريخ المنطقة ممتد عبر تاريخ منظمتنا هاته، وهو يؤكد أن القضية الفلسطينية تظل القضية المركزية التي لا يمكن طمسها ولا يمكن تحييدها ولا يمكن جيبها. واليوم نرى بأم أعيننا كيف أن محاولات الإجهاز على هذه القضية لم تزدها إلا شرعية ومشروعية كأعدل قضية على وجه المعمورة. وتاريخ المنطقة محفور في قرارات مجلسنا هذا، وهو يؤكد أن لا بديل لحل الدولتين ولا مفر من قيام الدولة الفلسطينية على حدود عام 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشريف كحل عادل، كحل دائم، وكحل نهائي للصراع الإسرائيلي الفلسطيني. واليوم نرى بأم أعيننا كذلك كيف أن مخططات القضاء على هذه الدولة لم تزدها إلا مدادا وزخما في الاعترافات الدبلوماسية بها، وهي الاعترافات التي ترحب بها الجزائر وتدعو إلى تعزيزها بتمكين الدولة الفلسطينية من العضوية الكاملة بمنظمتنا هاته. وتاريخ المنطقة متجذر في الشرعية الدولية، وهو يؤكد كذلك أنه لا مناص من وضع حد نهائي للنظام الاستثنائي الجائر الذي يحظى به الاحتلال الإسرائيلي من اللامساءلة واللا محاسبة واللا معاقبة. واليوم نرى بأم أعيننا أيضا كيف تيقنت أغلبية الدول الأعضاء بحتمية الردع والعقاب لمن يحسب نفسه وحيدا فوق كل النظم والثوابت والضوابط والقوانين التي يتقيد بها غيره. وفضلا عن هذا كله، فإن تاريخ المنطقة يؤكد أن الأمن والاستقرار في الشرق الأوسط لن يتحقق دون تحمل مجلسنا هذا للمسؤوليات الملقاة على عاتقه. فمصير القضية الفلسطينية ومصير الشعب الفلسطيني ومصير كافة دول وشعوب المنطقة كل هذه المصائر تبقى رهينة إرادة هذه المجلس وقدرته على فرض احترام قراراته وفرض احترام الشرعية الدولية وردع كل الإخلالات والخروقات والانتهاكات التي تتعرض لها راهنا دون حسيب أو رقيب أو عتيد. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Attaf for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Musa Timothy Kaba, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, I thank His Excellency Cho Hyun, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, convening this meeting at the request of Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, Pakistan, and Sierra Leone. I also thank the Secretary-General António Guterres for his important briefing. My delegation commends the principled leadership of the UN Secretary-General and the work of the UN teams in the field. Mr. President, the overall situation in the Middle East remains fragile and evolving. However, while some areas such as Lebanon and Syria are experiencing significantly less violence than before, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, in contrast, are in very dire circumstances, with civilians enduring over 23 months of unimaginable and increasing violence. We recall the attack by Hamas and other armed groups of 7th October 2023 that led to the killing and taking of hostages of Israeli civilians, and reiterate our unequivocal condemnation of that heinous action, especially the taking of hostages. Sierra Leone further recalls that since the start of this conflict, the Council has remained seized of this subject, having received extensive briefings on the prevailing city, humanitarian and political situation in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. We regret that effort by this Council and the mediators to secure a deal that allows for the cessation of hostilities have been met with challenges. In this regard, we have concluded, along with other member states, that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can only be resolved by peaceful means and that the military option is not viable. The atrocities committed on and since the attacks of 7th October 2023 highlight the urgency of finding a comprehensive and lasting solution to this long-standing conflict. Sierra Leone remains dedicated to supporting international efforts toward a political, just, and comprehensive settlement that ends the occupation, stops settlement expansion, and addresses extremism and terrorism. Sierra Leone is gravely concerned that the continuation of this war deepens despair among civilians in the Gaza Strip and the hostages held by Hamas. With intensified hostilities, significant loss of life, destruction of critical civilian infrastructure, blockades and evacuation orders, the civilians in the Gaza Strip, including women and children, have borne the brunt of this war. The current status quo is unacceptable, as it is unbearable for the civilians with no seeming hope of survival. This is a blatant violation of the United Nations Charter, the provisions of international humanitarian law, and Security Council resolutions. Guided by the UN Charter, international law, and the rule of law, we emphasize the following key points. First, a complete cessation of hostilities in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and an irreversible political process leading to a permanent ceasefire. The parties to the conflict must recommit to ongoing peace efforts and take concrete steps that will prevent further atrocities. We acknowledge and commend the efforts of the mediators, Egypt and Qatar, and the United States to achieve this end. Second, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, including Israeli civilians held by Hamas and Palestinian detainees held without due process. The immediate and unconditional lifting of the aid restrictions and restoration of full and unhindered humanitarian access. We emphasize the role of the United Nations and its partners, including UNRWA, to achieve this end. Third, Sierra Leone reaffirms its unwavering support for the two-state solution based on relevant General Assembly and Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1812 of 1947 and consistent with Article 4, Sub 1 of the United Nations Charter. We welcome the endorsement by the General Assembly of the New York Declaration and reaffirm the legitimacy of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, including their right to an independent and sovereign state over the entire occupied Palestinian territory, in line with international law and agreed parameters. Fourth, Sierra Leone supports Israel's right to exist in peace and security, free from threats and attacks. Accordingly, we urge all armed groups to disarm and renounce violence, paving the way for the demilitarization of the Palestinian territory. Sustainable peace cannot take root while armed groups continue to operate outside the law. We deplore and reject any attempt to forcibly displace Palestinians from their land. Palestinians temporarily evacuated must be allowed to return to their homes at the earliest opportunity. Finally, Mr. President, we emphasize the need for the Palestinian Authority to be fully empowered and supported politically, financially, and administratively to enable it to continue implementing its credible reform agenda. As we celebrate the 80th session of the United Nations, let us reflect on the principles on which this very institution was built. Among its core values is to promote peace, justice, and the dignity of all persons. We must exercise the political will to deliver peace to the Palestinians and Israelis. Ongoing international efforts are a positive step that must be fully leveraged by both parties in good faith. The time to act is now in order to save the Palestinian people from the scourge of war. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Kappa for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hugh Hilton Todd, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Guyana.
Mr. President, as a member state of the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, OIC, Guyana thanks you for facilitating the group's request for convening today's meeting. I also thank Secretary-General António Guterres for his remarks and for his consistent and principled advocacy on behalf of the Palestinian people and for peace in the Middle East region. Mr. President, the protracted Israeli aggression against Palestine cannot continue to be a defining feature for the politics in the Middle East. In recent times, the aggression has extended to other countries in the region, heightening instability and insecurity, driving Israeli poles away from its neighbors and undermining good neighborliness. The ongoing war in Gaza has itself become a catalyst of pain and pressure. Pain for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are the targets of Israelis' instruments of war, starvation, bombs, bullets, displacements, dispossession, and other cruelties solely intended to subjugate the Palestinian nation. We have seen, for example, how famine unfolded in Gaza in full view of the international community, and 192 countries could not stop it. The war in Gaza has also become a catalyst for pressure, political pressure, which seems to be the only way the occupying power might respond to the international outcry against genocidal acts being perpetuated against Palestinians. Guyana calls on the member states of the United Nations to ensure that their engagements with the State of Israel do not in any way contribute to prolonging the war in Gaza and the Israeli oppression of the Palestinian people. It took a collective effort to dismantle the system of apartheid in South Africa, and Guyana firmly believes that an equally strong and organized international response is needed to ensure the end of the occupation of the Palestinian territory. I must underscore the importance of recognition of the state of Palestine by all UN member states as a pivotal part of forcing an end to the Israeli occupation. Recognition lends greater strength to international efforts to end occupation and to achieve an independent Palestine. On the question of the occupation, Mr. President, allow me to recall that more than 1 year ago, the International Court of Justice issued its advisory opinion confirming that Israel's prolonged occupation of the Palestinian territory is illegal under international law and must be brought to an end. The General Assembly later demanded that Israel end its occupation within a year. That is by the 18th of September 2025. That date has now passed without compliance on Israel's part. On the contrary, we have instead witnessed a series of developments that only entrench the occupation further and destroy the two-state solution. Guyana calls on Israel to respect the Charter of the United Nations, to abide by the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly, the Security Council, and other organs of the United Nations, to cease its contempt of international law, and to commit to peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, the occupation of the Palestinian territory and the attendant ills is a historic tragedy of proportions that should shock the human conscience across the globe. Sadly, however, what we are witnessing is an othering of the Palestinian people that makes it difficult for some to see Palestinian people as they see their own people. We must all reject the othering and fight for the rights of the Palestinian people, as we would fight for the rights of our own people. The right-minded, the peace-loving, and the promoters of justice must continue to defend the Palestinian people and oppose all attempts to erase them from their homeland. I conclude, Mr. President, by reaffirming Guyana's continued commitment to the two-state solution and by underscoring our conviction that the rule of law will ultimately prevail in the decades-long question as long as all member states choose to be guided by the principles of the Charter. I also reiterate the calls we have consistently made over the last 2 years for a ceasefire in Gaza. For the release of all hostages held in Gaza and Palestinian detainees held in Israeli prisons, for the unimpeded humanitarian access in Gaza. I also call on Israel to cease all its actions that are dismantling the two-state solution and the possibility of peace in the Middle East region. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Todt for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Lars Løkke Rasmussen, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I want to thank Mr. Cho Hyun, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, for convening this meeting. And I also want to thank the Secretary-General for his very insightful briefing. Through the chaos of this abhorrent war, he has consistently raised his voice and that of United Nations in support of peace. And Denmark commend this kind of leadership. And I will also take this opportunity to thank the tireless efforts and sacrifice of the UN staff on the ground. Colleagues, I'm speaking to you today not only as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, and by so a politician responsible to the people of Denmark, but also as a member of this council, responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, and as a grandfather, responsible to my grandchildren, who I'm totally convinced one day will ask what I did, what we did, in the face of such immense suffering. Colleagues, I ask you today, how will we answer them? That we stepped up and met the challenge of peace, or that we idled in inaction and watched helplessly as the horrors unfolded? Mr. President, nearly 2 years have passed since the war in Gaza began. It was unleashed by the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on the October 7th, an attack that tore through Israeli families, that left parents without children, children without parents, a nation wounded to its core, hostages and their families going through unimaginable suffering. Denmark has condemned this attack in the strongest terms possible, and we will continue to do so, just as we will continue to insist on the immediate and safe release of every hostage. Denmark considers itself as a long-standing friend of the people of Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself against terrorism. This I have always supported, and this I will continue to support. But friends also have to speak the truth to each other. And today we must face the fact that Israel's war in Gaza has created a humanitarian catastrophe of unbearable scale. Israel must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. The human suffering in Gaza must be brought to an end, and it must happen now. Tens of thousands of civilians have already been killed, including over 18,000 children. This constitutes a classroom of children every day. It constitutes a humanitarian and human failure of unprecedented scale. We are witnessing an ongoing expanding military operation in Gaza City. Children starving with no access to clean water or medicine. Doctors forced to amputate without sedation. Mothers powerless to feed their babies. A famine unfolding before our eyes. While the World Food Programme alone has enough food to feed Gaza for months waiting at the border. This is also why Denmark, on behalf of the E10, coordinated a resolution for this council just last week. The resolution demanded a ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and that the government of Israel immediately lift all restrictions on the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza in line with international humanitarian law. These are demands that the international community has reiterated on multiple occasions, including just yesterday in the General Assembly. And I deeply regret that the resolution did not receive the support of all 15 Council members. But today I restate these demands. Israel must change its course immediately. The war in Gaza must end. The Security Council, as the body responsible for international peace and security, should be able to make this demand. Indeed, this should be the bare minimum that we can do. But around this table, that means all of us, every single member, working in concert and common cause towards this goal. It means setting aside political differences to save lives. Last week, 14 members of this council were willing to do this. We hope that this can soon become all 15. So to our American friends, just this morning, President Trump said that we have to stop the war in Gaza immediately. He said we have to negotiate immediately to negotiate for peace. Denmark continues to support the dedicated efforts of the US, Qatar and Egypt to mediate a ceasefire. Your unwavering commitment to find a path to peace is critical in the context, but we count on you in this council too. Your leadership is critical in our joint aspirations of bringing peace and stability to the region. Mr. President, I will conclude very soon. Denmark has consistently contributed to ease the suffering through humanitarian contributions. Together with 24 other countries and the EU, We have called on Israel to resume medical evacuations from Gaza to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and we stand ready to support the treatment of those patients. Mr. President, 2 weeks ago, I visited the region, which I have done several times since 7 October. I have met with the Israeli families of hostages. Their pain is real. Their demand must be immediately and unconditionally answered. I also met with Palestinians in the West Bank who face checkpoints, settlements, settler violence, destroyed property and land grabbing, and their pain is real as well. Their longing for freedom and dignity is evident. So, Mr. President, the two-state solution remains the only solution to lasting peace for two people, both deserving of security, both deserving of dignity. This was confirmed during the high-level conference on the two-state solution yesterday. It is clear that the momentum is growing, that we are witnessing a renewed energy and enthusiasm for peace based on the two-state solution, a solution that Denmark is prepared to build on. And this is why I said yesterday, and that I repeat today, the keys to recognition of the Palestinian state should no longer lie in the hands of the Israeli government. The Palestinians themselves must become masters of their own destiny. The time for the end of this decades-long struggle is now. The only path to lasting peace is the two-state solution for both Palestinians and Israelis. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Rasmussen for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Yvette Cooper, MP, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs of the United Kingdom.
Can I thank the President today and also the Secretary-General for the briefing at the beginning of this crucial session. Yesterday, alongside other ministers here in New York this week, I hosted a session to hear from doctors who have recently returned from Gaza. And the stories they told would stay with me forever. One told of the screams of toddlers and the scream of a toddler who she had operated on without full anesthetics, and how she hoped and prayed that he would not feel pain. Another told of the seriously malnourished pregnant women affecting their babies, and they talked about doctors and nurses whose family members were killed but who still came back to work in hospitals in unimaginable conditions to help others. And they told of how the absolute basics of modern medicine, like antibiotics and anesthetics, things that we around this council table take for granted for ourselves and our loved ones, were unavailable, blocked and denied. And we say the words humanitarian crisis, but this is what it means, the pain and the screams of a toddler who cannot get the basic health care that they need. And only 18 out of 36 hospitals in Gaza now remain open, all of them struggling to operate amid severe shortages of fuel, medicine, equipment and staff. Over 1,700 healthcare workers have been killed in Gaza, more than 300 detained. This is what the catastrophic collapse of Gaza's healthcare system looks like. And as we are gathered here, Israeli forces are escalating the conflict in Gaza City, pounding more homes into rubble, sending frightened families scattering. It is incomprehensible, it is inhumane, it is utterly unjustifiable, and it must end. All that this action from the Israeli government will do is make a catastrophic humanitarian situation worse. More healthcare in crisis, harder than ever to get desperately needed aid to those who need it, more innocent children enduring a man-made famine, more civilians killed, but making it harder to get the remaining hostages out. Hostages who are still being held, who were seized by Hamas on the barbaric terrorist attack of October the 7th, and are still being held in the most horrendous conditions, prolonging the anguish for their families. And I reiterate our condemnation of Hamas and that barbaric terrorism in October the 7th. I met with some of the UK-linked hostage families again last week. Their ask of all of us is to keep the hostages at the forefront of our minds, to do everything we can to give their loved ones the chance of coming home and to achieve a ceasefire that gives them the chance to do that. And that must be our task. We know what needs to be done. We need a ceasefire now. We need the release of all the hostages. We need the immediate restoration of aid and support for medical care, and we need a broader framework for the lasting peace. And I welcome and support mediation efforts being made by the United States, Qatar and Egypt to seek an end to conflict and to seek peace. We know too that Gaza cannot be seen in isolation from the West Bank. The Israeli government is tightening its stranglehold on the Palestinian economy and continuing to approve illegal settlement construction, including just recently in the E1 area of East Jerusalem, which is a further blow to the viability of a two-state solution. And we urge Israel to reverse these plans. After 2 years of bloodshed, I believe the world is united in wanting this awful war to end, united in wanting all the hostages released, united in rejection of any role for Hamas in the future of Gaza or the future of a Palestinian state, united in wanting Israel to unblock aid and end the humanitarian catastrophe, and united in wanting a better and more peaceful future for the region, with the reconstruction of Gaza, the dignity for its people, and a new era of relations to support their collective security. And that future must be based on a two-state solution. The UK's historic recognition of the state of Palestine this week is part of our commitment to peace, part of acting to protect the viability of the two-state solution as the only path to a just and lasting peace and to security for Palestinians and Israelis alike, projecting extremist ideas on all sides, which involve too often fantasies of the destruction of the state of Israel or expulsion of the Palestinian population. We reject both of those, and part of our wider effort to work with partners on a long-term peace, not just to halt the immediate crisis, but an advance and a pragmatic plan for what comes next. None of this can happen without an immediate ceasefire, and that is where all of this has to start. One of the doctors yesterday described the impact on children of growing up in trauma and devastation. And those will be the consequences on generations to come if we do not act now. We owe it to all of those children growing up in Gaza, across Palestine, across Israel. We owe it to all of them to build a better future. The time for peace is now. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Cooper for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Georgios Gerapatritis, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Hellenic Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank you personally for convening this important meeting today at a very critical moment for the Middle East. Distinguished colleagues, what we have been witnessing in the Gaza Strip, words fail to describe. The humanitarian catastrophe is ongoing. For almost 2 years, the civilian population has endured conditions that are unsustainable and deeply concerning. No one should be compelled to live under such circumstances. The expansion of military operations in the city of Gaza has led to further displacement and risks, worsening an already dire humanitarian crisis. This reality endangers civilian lives. Any further escalation in Gaza, which worsens the already dramatic situation for civilians, must be avoided. The plight of children underscores the urgent need to guarantee safe, unhindered and sustained humanitarian access at scale to all parts of Gaza, in full respect of international law and international humanitarian law. Mr. President, Greece is actively engaged in all efforts to alleviate the suffering of the people in Gaza. We have consistently provided humanitarian assistance. We have already welcomed injured children from Gaza for treatment in Greek hospitals. On another strand of effort, we voted in favor of every draft resolution that would address the crisis in Gaza, the latest demanding the lifting of all restrictions on humanitarian aid. And this past May, I stood alongside the representatives of 80 UN members here in New York, reaffirming the significance of protecting civilians in armed conflicts. Humanitarian access is crucial to alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian population. Safe access to food, water, shelter, clothing, and medicines throughout the territory must be guaranteed, and international humanitarian law must be respected. Initiatives to expand deliveries in Gaza by land, air, or sea must be further strengthened. At the same time, hostages continue to suffer horribly at the hands of Hamas. We were appalled by the images and videos released last month showing 2 hostages visibly emaciated as they described the appalling conditions of their captivity. We reiterate our call for unconditional release of all remaining hostages. Mr. President, we recall that this Council has rightly addressed the recent strikes in Doha earlier this month, which are even more concerning given Qatar's crucial role in hosting and mediating negotiations for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas alongside the United States and Egypt. We continue to believe that diplomacy remains the most effective tool even in the most difficult circumstances. Greece has unwaveringly supported the negotiation efforts and will continue to do so. And we urge all parties to rise up to the gravity of the situation, return to the negotiating table as soon as possible, and be guided by international law. Mr. President, recent settlement expansion in the West Bank and settler violence further impair the prospects for peace. We express our profound concern over announcements on the construction of additional settlements in the E1 area of West Bank. Such plans, were they to be realized, would further undermine the prospects of a two-state solution. The escalation of settler violence, including against Christian communities, is a cause for grave alarm as well. It needs to stop now. Mr. President, however remote or difficult the prospect may seem today, the two-state solution remains the only viable path forward. We need to provide the Palestinian people with a credible prospect of hope for the future. This is an indispensable condition for peace, stability, and security in the region, including the long-term security of Israel. We appreciate in this vein the leadership demonstrated by France and Saudi Arabia in co-chairing the two-state solution conference. We stand by all international initiatives, including the relevant global alliance and the Arab Plan, towards realizing this vision. We will continue to contribute to every effort that revives the political process towards a two-state solution, a political process which we firmly believe must lead to the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state through a revitalized and comprehensive approach, and which is essential for lasting peace and stability. Against this backdrop, we see no role for Hamas, neither in governance nor in future discussions concerning the day after in Gaza. Therefore, Greece has repeatedly stressed that an empowered and reformed Palestinian Authority must play a central role in Gaza's future and remains the best partner for peace. The European Union has already stepped up, approving a 3-year package worth around 1.6 billion euros, crucial to preventing fiscal collapse and enabling the Palestinian Authority to fulfill its task. Mr. President, to Greece, the stability of the Middle East is not an abstract concern. It is an indispensable necessity. As a country of Eastern Mediterranean, at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, developments in the region have a direct impact on our own security, prosperity, and stability, as well as on Europe as a whole. We are convinced that only through dialogue and the rule of international law, we can build a safer neighborhood, one where peoples can coexist in dignity and security. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gera Petritis for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Carlos Arturo Hoyos Boyd, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Panama.
Señor Presidente, Panamá agradece la convocatoria a esta sesión informativa a solicitud de las delegaciones de Argelia, Guyana, Pakistán, Sierra Leona y Somalia. De igual manera, agradecemos a Su Excelencia António Guterres, Secretario General de las Naciones Unidas, por el informe presentado que refuerza la obligación de este Consejo, conforme a la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, de responder con unidad y responsabilidad ante la magnitud de la catastrófica situación en los territorios palestinos. Durante más de 7 décadas, el conflicto palestino-israelí ha estado marcado por la falta de voluntad política para resolver sus causas profundas, abriendo el espacio a la desconfianza, el extremismo y a la violencia. Las consecuencias de esta falta de voluntad quedaron expuestas de manera brutal el 7 de octubre de 2023 con los ataques atroces de Hamás, los cuales condenamos enérgicamente una vez más y que cegaron la vida de más de 1.200 personas y secuestraron a otras 251, de lo cual se cree que 20 permanecen aún vivos, sufriendo en la oscuridad de los túneles, privados del acompañamiento de sus familiares y de la dignidad más básica. Aquel episodio desató una espiral de violencia que desembocó en una guerra sin precedentes por su nivel de devastación en la Franja de Gaza. Más de 65.000 palestinos, entre ellos 18.000 niños, han perdido la vida. Decenas de miles han resultado heridos, millones han sido desplazados a la fuerza de un lado a otro una y otra vez. Comunidades enteras han sido reducidas a escombros, dejando una huella imborrable de sufrimiento en miles de familias. Durante los 59 días que duró el alto al fuego entre enero y marzo de este año, fue posible detener el sufrimiento humano, facilitar la asistencia humanitaria en Gaza y avanzar en la liberación de rehenes. Desde su ruptura, la catastrófica situación humanitaria ha empeorado día tras día. Más de 14.000 palestinos han perdido la vida y decenas de miles han resultado heridos. Los rehenes y sus familias siguen pagando un precio insoportable, atrapados en la incertidumbre y el sufrimiento. Como si la violencia no fuera suficiente, el hambre también cobra vidas a cada día. La clasificación integrada de la seguridad alimentaria declaró la hambruna en Gaza. Más de 425 personas, incluyendo 125 niños, han muerto de hambre, no por falta de alimentos, sino por los obstáculos a su ingreso a la distribución de alimentos. Esta tragedia se ha visto agravada por el desarrollo de la operación militar sobre la ciudad de Gaza, todavía habitada por cientos de miles de personas, convertida en escenario de intensos bombardeos y operaciones terrestres que han provocado nuevos desplazamientos masivos y decenas de muertes, incluyendo niños. La devastación alcanza también a los servicios esenciales, hospitales y centros de salud dañados, redes de agua y saneamiento colapsadas y una precariedad extrema para quienes intentan salvar vidas o contar la verdad. El personal humanitario y los periodistas, de los cuales cientos han sido víctimas de la violencia, aún así siguen cumpliendo su labor en condiciones insostenibles y bajo amenazas constantes. Ningún objetivo puede justificar medios que violen el derecho internacional ni la protección de la vida humana. Por ello, Panamá nuevamente pide un alto al fuego inmediato y sostenido, la liberación inmediata, digna e incondicional de todos los rehenes y el acceso seguro, suficiente y sin restricciones de la vital ayuda humanitaria a Gaza. Estas son las condiciones mínimas de humanidad que no se pueden seguir postergando. Señor Presidente, la crisis no se limita a Gaza. En Cisjordania, incluida Jerusalén Oriental, la violencia ha alcanzado niveles alarmantes. La fragmentación territorial, la inseguridad y la falta de perspectivas minan las posibilidades de cualquier solución política pacífica, sostenible. Solo en lo que va del año, más de 186 palestinos y 16 israelíes han perdido la vida en incidentes por la intensificación del conflicto. A ellos se suman centenares de heridos y miles de personas afectadas por restricciones que condicionan su vida cotidiana. Las operaciones militares y las detenciones masivas han desplazado a familias enteras, incluidos niños y ancianos, mientras la instalación de nuevos cierres y obstáculos amenazan con aislar comunidades y cortar el acceso a escuelas, hospitales y lugares de trabajo, agravando aún más un panorama ya insostenible. Añadido a esto, la reciente violación injustificable al territorio de Qatar, un acto que Panamá también condenó enérgicamente, reitera la necesidad de acabar con el conflicto ante mayor preocupación de escalaciones. Señor presidente, Panamá reitera que no existe salida militar a este conflicto. Solo un proceso político, serio, integral y sostenido, basado en el derecho internacional, en las resoluciones pertinentes de este Consejo, que permita a israelíes y palestinos vivir bajo seguridad y dignidad, con fronteras reconocidas internacionalmente y derechos garantizados y con garantías verificables para ambos, puede solucionarlo. Esa es la única vía posible para poner fin a décadas de sufrimiento y abrir un espacio a reconciliación. Muchas gracias.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Hoyos Boyd for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Korean presidency for convening this meeting based on the request from the OIC members of this council. I would like to welcome all the distinguished ministers participating in this meeting today. I would also like to express our gratitude to the Secretary-General for his briefing. Mr. President, we remain gravely concerned about the continued escalation of Israeli military operations in Gaza. As we speak, these military operations are expanding rapidly, and for the 2 million people still trapped in Gaza, it's a death sentence, literally and figuratively. Since this war began, over 65,000 Palestinians have been killed, the majority of them women and children. Last month's IPC report has removed all doubts about what's happening in Gaza. Famine is no longer looming. It is taking place now. It is taking place now in front of our all us. The death of children from hunger and disease is not a forecast. It's a daily reality. Let us be absolutely clear. This is a man-made disaster created through siege, blockade, and systematic obstruction of humanitarian aid. The starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is prohibited, and the use of hunger as a collective punishment is a grave violation of international law. We must act with moral clarity. The International Court of Justice advisory opinion unequivocally reaffirmed the legal obligations of all states regarding the occupied Palestinian territory. These obligations are binding and they must be enforced. The blatant disregard for these binding decisions, including the provisional measures issued in January and March of this year, is a direct challenge to the international legal order. In that regard, I would like to make the following points. First, we reiterate our call for an immediate, unconditional, and permanent ceasefire. It's clear that there is no military solution to this conflict. Somalia recognizes and supports the ongoing ceasefire efforts led by Qatar, the United States, and Egypt, and commends their unwavering commitment. The Israeli airstrikes on residential areas in Doha, capital of Qatar, on September 9th mark a grave and perilous escalation. It's appalling that this military airstrike unfolded when negotiators were engaged in talks over a US-backed ceasefire proposal. We stress that mediators must not be targeted, but they should be protected to ensure a pathway to peace remains viable. Second, my delegation calls for the immediate and full restoration of humanitarian access for all UN agencies, including UNRWA, throughout Gaza. Israel, as the occupying power, bears the legal responsibility under international humanitarian law, including the Fourth Geneva Convention. Somalia reiterates its call for the immediate release of all arbitrary detainees to return to their families and loved ones. Third, we must revive a credible political track towards the recognition of the State of Palestine as full member of the United Nations, and stress the importance of the unification of Gaza and West Bank under a single Palestinian Authority. We call for international support for the reconstruction and development in the Palestinian territories, including Gaza. There is no doubt that addressing the root causes of the conflict begins with the end of the occupation and the establishment of a sovereign, independent state of Palestine with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital in accordance with relevant UN resolutions. In that regard, we welcome the resumption of the two-state solution conference co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia. We commend the states who have recognized the state of Palestine and urge others to do so. Mr. President, to conclude, Somalia reaffirms its commitment to working with all partners toward a just and lasting peace in the Middle East, in line with international law and advancing the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. I thank you.
Representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et tout d'abord, je voudrais remercier le secrétaire général des Nations Unies pour son intervention et son engagement en faveur du soutien à la solution des deux États, en faveur de la paix et de la sécurité pour Israël et pour la Palestine. Hier, à la tribune de l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies, lors de la conférence pour la solution à deux États, le président de la République française a rappelé avec force ce qui nous rassemble. L'urgence de mettre fin à la guerre à Gaza et de donner une chance réelle à la paix. Aujourd'hui, au Conseil de sécurité, il est de notre responsabilité collective de traduire cette exigence en décisions concrètes. Monsieur le Président, la France condamne sans les attaques terroristes du 7 octobre 2023. Rien ne peut justifier le recours au terrorisme. La France condamne de même les atteintes graves à tant de vies innocentes à Gaza. Des centaines de milliers d'êtres humains y sont plongés dans la faim, la peur et le deuil. La France rejette enfin les perspectives inacceptables de déplacement forcé de la population gazaoui. L'extension de l'offensive militaire israélienne à la ville de Gaza, depuis une semaine, ne fait qu'infliger des souffrances supplémentaires à la population de Gaza. Il nous appartient de construire une alternative réaliste, fidèle à nos valeurs et conforme au droit international. Alors que la famine continue de gagner du terrain dans la bande de Gaza, la France ne peut qu'être préoccupée que ce Conseil n'ait pas réussi à s'entendre jeudi dernier pour appeler à répondre à l'urgence humanitaire. Le message de la France est clair. Toutes les vies se valent et toutes les vies doivent être protégées. La libération immédiate et inconditionnelle des otages encore détenus par le Hamas est une priorité. Cette exigence doit aller de pair avec un cessez-le-feu permanent à Gaza afin de mettre fin aux souffrances de la population à Gaza et permettre l'acheminement sûr, massif et sans entrave de l'aide humanitaire. Monsieur le Président, hier, le président de la République française a annoncé la reconnaissance par la France de l'État de Palestine. Ce geste traduit une conviction profonde. La sécurité d'Israël et la justice pour les Palestiniens sont consubstantielles. Elles ne peuvent être garanties que par la coexistence de deux États souverains et démocratiques vivant côte à côte, en paix et en sécurité, avec Jérusalem pour capitale. Cette décision, partagée par de nombreux autres États, ouvre une voie politique qu'il nous appartient de consolider. Cette voie s'articule autour d'une feuille de route, celle de la déclaration de New York, que la France, avec l'Arabie saoudite et de nombreux partenaires, a soumis et fait adopter à l'Assemblée générale grâce au soutien de 142 États. Cette feuille de route repose sur deux étapes essentielles. La première, celle de l'urgence, vise à obtenir la libération des otages, la cessation des hostilités et un accès humanitaire massif. Nous appelons toutes les parties concernées à reprendre au plus vite et de bonne foi les négociations. Nous saluons à ce titre les efforts de médiation inlassables du Qatar, de l'Égypte et des États-Unis. La seconde étape est celle de la stabilisation et de la reconstruction. Une administration de transition excluant le Hamas devra être mise en place à Gaza sous l'égide de l'autorité palestinienne soutenue par la communauté internationale. Elle devra garantir la sécurité, entreprendre le désarmement effectif du Hamas et répondre aux besoins urgents de la population. La France, avec ses partenaires européens, est prête à contribuer, y compris par la participation à une mission internationale de stabilisation décidée par ce Conseil le moment venu. Ce processus exige aussi une gouvernance palestinienne renouvelée et réformée, mettant pleinement en œuvre les engagements pris. Il suppose, de la part d'Israël, des choix clairs en faveur de la négociation et du respect du droit international. L'Union européenne, avec la France, conditionnera sa coopération future à ces engagements. Monsieur le Président, l'alternative est simple. Soit nous préservons la possibilité de deux États, et avec cette possibilité, la paix. Soit nous laissons s'installer un conflit permanent aux conséquences désastreuses pour la région et bien au-delà. La France appelle ce Conseil à agir avec la détermination et le sens des responsabilités qui lui incombent. L'histoire jugera notre capacité à saisir ce moment. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. I find it, and we find it deeply regrettable that council members have opted to convene this high-level UN Security Council briefing on Gaza on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, knowing full well that that decision excludes Israel. And frankly, colleagues, it's a testament to how this council has prioritized a lot of performance over serious efforts to actually advance peace. Serious efforts that President Trump, Secretary Rubio, his team, and partners like Egypt and Qatar are engaged in right now as we speak, to end this horrific war. There have been over 80 council meetings on this issue since October 7th. The main outcome of these meetings, unfortunately, has been to embolden Hamas, to undermine and disrupt negotiations that are aimed at freeing all of the hostages and ending the war and ending the suffering that we all want to end. Unspoken today, in the last 2 weeks alone, Israel has suffered 2 terrorist attacks in Jerusalem on September 8th and at the Allenby border crossing on September 18th. We condemn these attacks. We offer condolences to the families of those killed. We call upon other countries to join us in a clear and explicit condemnation of this violence by Hamas and its ideological allies. And extremists like the terrorists who killed 2 IDF soldiers on September 18th have shown their utter contempt for the people of Gaza. Hamas has shown its utter contempt for the people of Gaza. They struck the very border crossing through which nearly half of all aid delivered to Gaza between May and September of this year has passed. Let me say again, Hamas struck the border crossing through which half of all aid through the better part of this year has passed. No country here would willingly allow terrorists like this to threaten its people. Israel should not be expected to be any different. And of course, has the right to defend itself from groups that wish to do it harm. As Secretary of State Rubio recently said, as long as Hamas exists, there will be no peace in the Middle East. And every member here has seen evidence of how Hamas has starved hostages, has tortured them. We've heard the testimony of freed hostages and what they've endured in captivity. And sadly, some endure still. We, the United States, again demand Hamas immediately release all 48 remaining hostages and their remains, cease putting civilians in harm's way, cease sacrificing their own people for propaganda aims, that they disarm, and that they surrender. This war could end today if that happened. But Hamas refuses. While Israel has accepted the negotiators' proposals, rewarding Hamas's refusal, whether with performative conferences or one-sided Security Council resolutions, colleagues, it undermines and it delays achieving the peace we all want. Unfortunately, yesterday's conference spoke to domestic audiences, but it will prolong this tragic war in Gaza, and it will prolong the suffering. Hamas stands emboldened today after that conference. We've rewarded its obstruction. We've undermined efforts to achieve peace in both the short and the long term. Unilateral recognition statements do not alter the reality on the ground. It does not alter the fact that there is not a Palestinian state to recognize. And at this point, there is no credible Palestinian partner for peace. The Palestinian Authority leaders from Ramallah are absent from New York this week because they failed to meet their Oslo commitments. The commitments were basic, including renouncing terrorism, renouncing violence, resolving issues through direct negotiations with Israel. The Palestinian Authority has failed to clear even those low bars. And their attempts to bypass negotiations through what can only be called lawfare, including at the ICC and at the ICJ, and its pushes for unilateral recognition of statehood. This charade is disappointing. It is clearly fueled by domestic politics and has given Hamas a reward for refusing to surrender, as well as an incentive. They're now incentivized to hold on, keep holding the hostages in subhuman conditions. We call on the Council membership and the UN to change its course, to focus instead onto how to prevent Hamas from ever doing this again and to how to eliminate them, on how they should free the hostages and create a framework so that Gaza can have a better future than the life, that the people of Gaza can have a better future than the life they have endured under terrorists. Secretary of State Rubio recently traveled to Israel and Qatar to address the threat posed by Hamas, to advance the immediate return of all hostages, and to ensure humanitarian aid actually reaches civilians. And the United States will continue working tirelessly towards those ends. And the Secretary was clear. The United States supports a negotiated settlement that will lead to the release of every single hostage. The President was clear today in the General Assembly to that same end. We must lead to the elimination of Hamas, and we must end the war. In the interim, the United States has worked to support the delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza with actual meaningful results. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has securely delivered more than 170 million meals directly to civilians. We have also seen the increased flow of humanitarian aid, including through UN entities. However, looting and diversion is undeniable and remains serious problems that must be addressed. The UN's own data shows that approximately 85% of UN aid sent to Gaza since May 19th has been looted. Colleagues, the fighting must end so the international community can concentrate on the very hard work of building a new Gaza, one that embraces peace and coexistence and rejects terrorism and violence. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席，我感谢阿尔及利亚、圭亚那、巴基斯坦、塞阿利昂和索马里倡议召开此次会议，感谢古特雷斯秘书长的通报。主席，巴勒斯坦问题是中东问题的核心，事关中东和平稳定，事关国际和平与安全。70多年来，巴以局势屡现动荡，多次引发战争，始终牵动国际形势演变和国际关系发展。本轮加沙冲突爆发后，巴勒斯坦人民深陷水火，黎巴嫩、叙利亚、也门、伊朗等多地局势升级，就连卡塔尔也遭到了袭击。中东硝烟四起，动荡加剧，恶化了全球安全环境，冲击了世界经济发展前景，不符合国际社会的共同利益。为此，必须高度重视并加快解决当前乱局的核心——巴勒斯坦问题。我讲4点。第一，必须立即结束加沙惨剧。近2年的冲突已使加沙生灵涂炭，满目疮痍。以色列仍在升级军事进攻，制造更多的平民伤亡、流离失所。军事手段不是解决问题的出路，立即停火才是拯救生命、让人质回家的正确方式。我们敦促以色列立在加沙的一切军事行动，履行占领方的国际人道法义务，全面恢复人道物资准入。上周，安理会加沙问题决议草案再次遭到一个常任理事国的否决，我们对此深感失望。希望有关国家切实负起责任，为平息战火做出真诚努力。第二，必须缓解约旦河西岸紧张局势。以色列在约旦河西岸持续扩张定居点，强拆巴勒斯坦人建筑，频繁开展搜查、抓捕、袭击，纵容定居者暴力。近期占领方还批准并推进E1区定居点计划，这一危险行为严重违反国际法和安理会决议，冲击巴勒斯坦领土连贯性，侵蚀巴勒斯坦独立建国的基础。我们呼吁以色列立即停止定居点活动，遏制定居者暴力，撤销对巴勒斯坦经济活动的限制。第三，必须纠正巴勒斯坦遭受的历史不公。以色列早已独立建国，而巴勒斯坦人民仍无处安身，这是巴以问题的症结所在。两国方案是解决巴勒斯坦问题的唯一可行出路，不可替代，不容否定。昨天，联大举行的落实两国方案高级别会议，再次发出了支持两国方案的强烈呼声。一批西方国家近来也纷纷承认巴勒斯坦国。国际社会应当延续当前积极势头，努力重振两国方案前景，支持巴勒斯坦早日独立建国，早日成为联合国正式会员国。加沙和西岸都是巴勒斯坦不可分割的领土，要坚决反对破坏两国方案基础的单边行动。任何战后治理和重建安排都应当尊重巴勒斯坦人民的意愿，维护巴勒斯坦民族的 正当权利。第四，必须维护中东地区和平稳定。本轮加沙冲突爆发以来，滥用武力和军事冒险频频发生，引发地区局势深刻演变。当前中东地区再一次站在历史的十字路口，是缓和还是紧张？是对话还是对抗？是和平还是战争？这是地区国家和国际社会需要共同做出的选择。我们呼吁各方切实尊重中东国家的主权、安全和领土完整，呼吁以色列切实尊重中东人民的生存权和发展权，呼吁中东各国从地区长治久安出发，秉持共同安全理念，以包容化解分歧，以沟通化解矛盾，共建公平正义的地区秩序，共创和平发展的地区未来。主席，中方在巴勒斯坦问题上始终秉持公道正义，始终坚定支持巴勒斯坦人民的正义事业。中国国家主席习近平先后提出全球安全倡议和全球治理倡议，为解决冲突热点、维护国际和平、坚守多边主义、加强全球治理贡献了中国方案，对解决中东问题也具有重要指导意义。我们愿以倡议为指引，同国际社会一道努力，推动停火止战，缓解人道灾难，落实两国方案，最终实现巴勒斯坦问题的全面、公正、持久解决，让巴以人民共享安宁和幸福，让中东地区迎来和平稳定与发展繁荣。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, благодарим генерального секретаря за доклад об обстановке в секторе Газа. Приветствуем участие в сегодняшнем заседании глав внешнеполитических ведомств, региональных государств и профильных международных организаций. Кризис в Газе, масштабы которого по числу жертв среди мирного населения превосходит любые конфликты последних десятилетий, привел к эскалации во всем регионе. Причем с горячими всплесками сразу в нескольких региональных государствах. В этой связи понимаем желание ближневосточных партнеров высказаться на эту острую и напрямую коснувшуюся каждого из них тему. Уважаемые коллеги, в последние недели в стенах ООН произошел ряд крупных событий на треке БВУ, которые очень четко отражают растущую солидарность международного сообщества в том, что происходящее в секторе Газа из-за действий Израиля, какими бы причинами оно не было обусловлено, недопустимо и не может продолжаться. В прошлый четверг 14 членов Совета проголосовали за проект резолюции с требованием немедленного и безусловного прекращения огня, освобождения всех удерживаемых ХАМАС заложников, снятия жесткой гуманитарной блокады Газы и обеспечения безопасного и беспрепятственного доступа к нуждающимся. К сожалению, Соединенные Штаты его заблокировали, уже в 7-й раз применив вето по этому сюжету. При этом чуть ранее Совету все же удалось согласовать, пусть и весьма общий, сигнал с осуждением атаки Израиля против суверенного государства Катар. Несмотря на то, что остановить кровопролитие в Газе ООН пока и не удается, как и не удается принудить Израиль к возвращению на рельсы двухгосударственного решения. В ходе последних 2 дней, в ходе международной конференции Генассамблеи произошли важные символические подвижки в части признания рядом государств палестинской государственности. Это хоть и запоздалый, но крайне важный сигнал израильскому военно-политическому руководству о том, что справедливость в отношении палестинского народа должна быть восстановлена. К сожалению, для этого потребовалось, чтобы за почти 2 года израильской операции в Газе погибли более 65 тысяч мирных палестинцев. Признание палестинского государства – это не милость с барского плеча в адрес Рамаллы, а исторический долг перед палестинским народом, который следовало исполнить почти 80 лет назад. Россия к этому призывает уже многие десятилетия. Ведь Советский Союз, напомню, признал государство Палестины еще в 1988 году. Израиль же не только остается глух к воззваниям международного сообщества, но и, ободряемый своими американскими союзниками, отвечает на них угрозами, утверждая, что волна новых признаний палестинской государственности – это якобы награда Хамас за теракт 7 октября. В Западном Иерусалиме вовсю идут разговоры о формальной аннексии СБРИ после недели высокого уровня. Именно поэтому сейчас крайне важен четкий сигнал о недопустимости подобных шагов. Тем более нельзя поддаваться ни на какие угрозы ответных мер, ведь, как сказал генсекретарь, только наши действия могут положить конец происходящему. Уважаемые коллеги, солидарная поддержка международным сообществом чаяний палестинского народа на мирную жизнь в рамках собственного государства – это тот импульс, который нам необходимо совместно развивать и прикладывать усилия к тому, чтобы он получил практическое воплощение. Первоочередная задача сейчас – добиться того, чтобы кризис в Газе был решен не жестокими фактами на земле, то есть путем полной зачистки палестинцев, как нацеливается израильское руководство, и не их переселением из анклава и его коммерческим обустройством, как предлагают разного рода радикальные планы на Западе, а путем гуманной, цивилизованной дипломатии, которая бы объединила усилия в ООН и на региональном уровне со стороны арабских государств, стремящихся помочь своим палестинским собратьям. Палестинцы – это не объект социальных экспериментов. Это народ, который имеет такое же право на суверенное существование и развитие, как и наши с вами народы. Однако любые дипломатические усилия будут работать лишь при условии отказа израильских властей от ставки на силовое решение этого вопроса, осознания ими, что оно не принесет ничего хорошего для самого Израиля, который попросту не сможет стабильно и безопасно жить в условиях военной операции по всем азимутам. Второй важный элемент, чтобы все это осознали и в Вашингтоне, перестав видеть в ООНовских площадках и многосторонней дипломатии врага, который якобы мешает американской дипломатии на земле. К сожалению, пока мы видим ровно противоположные тенденции. И Израиль и Соединенные Штаты продолжают утверждать, что Западный Иерусалим действует гуманно, борясь с террористами. Именно этим в официальных израильских сводках оправдываются удары по госпиталям и школам, расстрелы гуманитарных конвоев, гибель женщин, детей и гуманитарных работников. Язык ненависти и пропаганды приводит к тому, что израильские военные каждый день убивают десятки простых мирных палестинцев, свято веря, что все это ради высшего блага израильского государства. Таким образом, почти 2 года Западный Иерусалим последовательно строит и навязывает миру искаженную картину, в которой палестинцы – люди второго сорта, которых можно истреблять, выселять, морить голодом и убивать прямо на пунктах раздачи гуманитарной помощи. Руководство же секретариата ООН, его гуманитарное крыло и даже государства-члены, призывающие к прекращению огня и налаживанию гумдоступа, израильские представители не стесняясь называют пособниками террористов. Эта радикальная, искажающая реальность риторика, наряду с явным настроем Западного Иерусалима на постоянную эскалацию внутри региона, в которые уже оказались втянуты Ливан, Сирия, Иран, Йемен, Катар, подрывают любые подвижки в сторону мирного урегулирования ближневосточного кризиса. Израильский удар по Дохе, одному из ключевых посредников переговоров, четко продемонстрировал, что Израиль нацелен не на дипломатию, а на бесконечную войну, невзирая даже на оставшихся в живых заложников, которым эта война, не оставляет шансов выбраться живыми. Очевидно и то, что стратегический замысел Израиля состоит в том, чтобы поставить под полный контроль всю палестинскую территорию, как Газу, так и СБРИ. Планы аннексии обсуждаются открыто, не только без стеснения, а даже с гордостью и чувством выполнения исторической миссии. И это не просто громкие слова. Газа планомерно зачищается, нарезается на так называемые зоны безопасности, которые с каждым днем уменьшаются. Западный берег застраивается новыми израильскими поселениями. а фанатично настроенные поселенцы в худших традициях колониализма прошлых веков издеваются над палестинским населением и выгоняют их с родных земель при попустительстве властей. Вовсю реализуется политика агрессивного поселенчества, при которой палестинцам в лучшем случае будет отведена роль жителей гетто, а в худшем – изгнанников. Господин председатель, картина ужасающей несправедливости, насилия, унижения человеческого достоинства, которая сейчас разворачивается на оккупированной палестинской территории, это призыв к действию. Этого от нас ждут сотни тысяч людей на улицах по всему миру, которые требуют прекращения бессмысленного кровопролития в Газе и освобождения Палестины. Этого от нас ждут и израильские заложники, и их семьи, которые, протестуя в Тель-Авиве, Иерусалиме и других городах, выступают за заключение всеобъемлющей сделки по освобождению пленников и окончанию боевых действий. Войны не хочет никто, ни простые палестинцы, ни простые израильтяне. Этот пронзительный призыв сформулировала израильтянка Галит Дан, чья дочка и мать были убиты 7 октября. «Я не хочу мести, я хочу надежду. Во имя тех, кто потерял все, и во имя тех, кто еще может быть спасен. Пожалуйста, остановите войну». Конец цитаты. Господин председатель, мы верим в силу многосторонней дипломатии. Несмотря на то, что она не всегда приносила успех, за 80 лет существования ООН именно благодаря ей удается избегать Третьей мировой войны. Уверены, что она может помочь и с разрешением застарелого ближневосточного кризиса. Для этого необходима коллективная воля международного сообщества, которая выражалась не только в декларациях с высоких трибун, но и конкретных действиях. Настоятельно призываем наших американских коллег отбросить свои твердолобые установки и подключиться к реальным шагам, которые Совет Безопасности обязан предпринять в соответствии с порученным ему мандатом по поддержанию международного мира и безопасности. Это будет лишь на благо вашего ближайшего союзника, чью безопасность невозможно обеспечить одними лишь силовыми средствами. Тупиковый характер такого подхода доказывают десятилетия палестино-израильского конфликта. Пора осознать, что только дипломатическое урегулирование палестинского вопроса на основе формулы двух государств для двух народов способно гарантировать устойчивый мир на Ближнем Востоке, безопасность израильских граждан, а также справедливые чаяния палестинского народа на собственное государство. В противном случае бесконечная и бессмысленная бойня будет продолжаться, унося все больше жизней мирных граждан, сея раздор между новыми поколениями арабов и израильтян и уничтожая любые шансы на то, что они наконец смогут сосуществовать в мире и спокойно развиваться. Этого допустить нельзя. Рассчитываем, что также думают остальные здравомыслящие члены международного сообщества. Мы готовы действовать совместно с ними, чтобы мирный и процветающий Ближний Восток наконец стал реальностью. Это историческая обязанность ООН, ее Совета Безопасности и каждого из нас. Призываем ее выполнить. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the State of Palestine.
Allow me at the outset to thank the Korean Presidency of the Security Council for convening this important meeting, and to thank the OIC countries, members of the Council, for requesting this meeting to highlight the horrific situation in Gaza as world leaders meet here in New York. I also want to thank the high-level representatives participating in this meeting. Allow me to also thank Secretary-General Guterres for his relentless efforts and his very moving and inspiring statements in these past 2 days. And through him, we wish to extend Palestine's gratitude to the entire United Nations and its personnel on the ground, with remembrance of those who were killed while trying to save lives in the midst of this genocide. Mr. President, we just adopted a declaration on protection of humanitarian personnel on the North Lawn Sunday afternoon. This Council has adopted resolutions on protection of civilians, including children and women and humanitarians and journalists. In Gaza, not only do they not benefit from protection, they are primary targets of the Israeli onslaught. Mr. President, the Palestinian people have suffered from the denial of their existence for decades. Now, they are being confronted yet again with an attempt to destroy our nation altogether. Recognition of the State of Palestine is an affirmation that the world rejects such denial, rejects the attempts at our destruction, and supports our right to existence, up to self-determination. And that is not a gift, this is a right, and the Palestinian people have been struggling for almost 100 years for the attainment of such a right. It was not born recently. It is also a clear indication that the international community refuses to abandon the rule of international law and refuses to abandon the two-state solution, the only path to regional peace and security. This recognition is not taking place in a vacuum. It is an integral part of the international mobilization to end this horrific war and move towards peace. The New York Declaration adopted in the General Assembly by the historic high-level international conference co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France charts a clear path to the independence and sovereignty of the State of Palestine, living side by side in peace and security with Israel based on the relevant UN resolutions. And while all eyes were turned towards New York yesterday, as President Macron took to the podium to announce the historic decision to recognize the State of Palestine alongside other countries, including the United Kingdom, all minds and hearts were turned towards Gaza. Ending the genocide in Gaza is the utmost priority, one that can suffer no delay, one that requires resolute action. Only an immediate ceasefire can save lives, the lives of 2 million Palestinians, children, women, and men, the lives of 20 Israeli hostages. The slaughter must stop. The destruction must stop. The occupation-made famine must be brought to an end without delay. Israel must fully withdraw its forces, and the Palestinian people should have freedom and dignity. We support the mediation efforts by the US, Egypt, and Qatar, and condemn yet again the Israeli strike on the territory of Qatar, a key mediator as it was convening a meeting to advance a ceasefire agreement and this never-ending regional escalation. Mr. President, nothing justifies delaying such a ceasefire that is the only way to stop the bloodshed, release the hostages and prisoners and human remains, and allow unhindered humanitarian access. We need decisive actions to deter the prolongation and escalation of this war, and we thank the countries who have undertaken such measures. The Council has a sacred mandate in this regard that it has been prevented from honoring. I thank Algeria and the E10 for relentless efforts and for putting forward last week a draft resolution to yet again pursue such an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, and I thank the 14 members of this Council who supported such a draft resolution that was blocked by a veto. Mr. President, the New York Declaration foresees the deployment of an international stabilization mission upon invitation by Palestine and mandated by the Security Council to protect the Palestinian people, uphold the ceasefire, support the Palestinian National Authority security forces, and provide security guarantees to all. This must be supported. The Gaza Strip must be reunified with the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority, as reaffirmed repeatedly by this Council. We call for your support to our policy of one Palestinian state, one Palestinian government, one law, and one gun. The Arab OIC reconstruction plan must be implemented without delay. Our people urgently need recovery, need food, water, medicine, and care, need shelter, need healing. We are ready to work with the international community, with the United Nations, leading humanitarian efforts, including UNRWA, to make this happen. We are ready to work with the U.S. administration. Our president reiterated that yesterday in the General Assembly, and I will not react to the falsification of our record by the new PR, the new ambassador of the United States. We will work with this administration, with Saudi Arabia and regional actors, France and international partners, and the members of this Council to advance these goals for peace. Mr. President, Palestinians are not lesser beings. We are entitled to life and liberty and dignity. The horrors inflicted by Israel upon our people in Gaza can have no justification. Colonization and occupation have no justification. We are not condemned to live under perpetual occupation, nor are Palestinians and Israelis are condemned to perpetual war. We are committed to peace in words and deeds, and we will honor our obligations. But Israel must also be made to respect its obligations. It is not only one-way street. No genocide, no dispossession, no forcible displacement, no colonization, no annexation, no occupation. A change in long overdue and sea change we are seeing across the world in support of Palestinian self-determination and independence, in support of peace and security, must lead to a fundamental change on the ground. Save Gaza, save Palestine, save peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jonas Gahr Støre, Prime Minister of Norway.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have requested to speak in order to make three essential points about the horror that we are witnessing in Palestine. So let me address them. First, we join others in expressing our deepest concern about Israel's expanded military campaign ongoing in Gaza as we meet. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire, drastically improved humanitarian access, and the unconditional release of remaining hostages. Second, while this crisis requires immediate action, it is just as important to lay the foundations now for the day after the war and for the end to the conflict. As the conference yesterday made clear, the overwhelming majority of member states of the United Nations consider the two-state solution the only credible basis for peace in the Middle East. Peace for Israelis and peace for Palestinians. Mr. President, my capital city, Oslo, is in many ways synonymous with those efforts thanks to the Oslo Accords that created the Palestinian Authority back in 1993. Ever since, my country has worked towards one goal: peace, security, and dignity for the Palestinians and the Israelis
living side by side in two sovereign states enjoying the rights and obligations that follow from the Charter of the United Nations. Norway recognized the State of Palestine in May last year. That was a hand to those on both sides who seek peaceful solution. And I need to say on behalf of those who recognized Palestine yesterday, doing so is turning the back on terror. It is turning the back on Hamas. It is taking the voice away from them and handing it to the peaceful part of the Palestinian overwhelming majority who want to live with rights and obligation under the Charter. Our decision reflected a realization that the old approach, waiting for a negotiated outcome before we recognize, was no longer a feasible option. One party simply refused to engage and to veto progress, and we cannot live with that. So let this be clear, a Palestinian state has been part of the vision for decades. Today we are far from realizing it on the ground. But the international support for and recognition of the State of Palestine is gaining momentum. The majority is growing. And I commend France and Saudi Arabia for arranging the historic session in the General Assembly yesterday. This week, 2 additional permanent members of the Security Council declared it is time. Which brings me to my third point, Mr. President. Let us use this momentum also to mobilize necessary financial support to support the Palestinian authorities with necessary reforms, to implement the roadmap that was agreed in the General Assembly on September 12th, and to resume meaningful engagement and decisive peace talks. Norway will host, as we do every year, a ministerial meeting of the International Donor Group for Palestine, the AHLC, in New York this week. As stated by Prime Minister Mustafa, the severe lack of funds represents an existential and immediate threat to Palestine state building. Together with a broad group of countries, we are working to raise emergency funding for that Palestinian government. We encourage all member states to contribute. And we continue to call on Israel to release tax revenues owed to Palestine. This is Palestinian value creation being held and kept away, and that has to end. There will be no state of Palestine or a body to govern Gaza the day after the war ends without a functioning, reformed, and legitimate Palestinian authority. That is critical for peace and security in the region, including for Israel, Mr. President. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Stere for the statement. I now give the floor to His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Khaled Al-Hamad Al-Mubarak Al-Sabah, the Crown Prince of the State of Kuwait.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أتشرف بأن ألقي هذا البيان بالنيابة عن دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية، وهي المملكة العربية السعودية ودولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة ومملكة البحرين وسلطنة عمان ودولة قطر وبلاد دولة الكويت. وفي البداية نشكر دول منظمة التعاون الإسلامي في مجلس الأمن لطلب عقد هذه الجلسة الطارئة، والشكر موصول لجمهورية كوريا رئيس مجلس الأمن لهذا الشهر لعقد هذه الجلسة في هذا الوقت الهام. سيد الرئيس، نجتمع اليوم ومأساة غزة قد مر عليها ما يقارب العامين، حيث يواجه الشعب الفلسطيني الأعزل أبشع صور المعاناة من حصار خانق جائر ودمار واسع وفقد آلاف الضحايا من المدنيين الأبرياء فاق عددهم 60,000 شهيد، معظمهم من النساء والأطفال. وإن ما يجري في القطاع ما هو إلا مثال حي للإبادة الجماعية والتطهير العرقي، وهو جرح مفتوح في الضمير الإنساني لا يمكن السكوت عنه. وقد تابعنا بقلق بالغ التصعيد العسكري الأخير وندين بأشد العبارات الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية الغادرة التي طالت دولة قطر الشقيقة، ونؤكد بوضوح لا لبس فيه أن أي مساس بأمن أي دولة خليجية هو اعتداء على جميع دول مجلس التعاون، فأمننا واحد وموقفنا واحد ومصيرنا واحد. سيد الرئيس، إن السلام العادل والدائم في منطقتنا لا يمكن أن يتحقق إلا من خلال حل الدولتين استنادا إلى قرارات الشرعية الدولية وفي مقدمتها قرارات مجلس الأمن ومبادرة السلام العربية، فهذا هو السبيل الوحيد لإنهاء الاحتلال وضمان حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني الشقيق المشروعة وإقامة دولته المستقلة على حدود 4 يونيو لعام 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. ونحذر من خطورة محاولات تقويض هذا الحل أو الالتفاف عليه عبر سياسات الاستيطان والتهجير وفرض الأمر الواقع، فالمجتمع الدولي وبخاصة مجلس الأمن مطالب بتحمل مسؤولياته كاملة لمنع استمرار هذه الانتهاكات وضمان عدم إفلات مرتكبي الجرائم من المحاسبة وضمان الوصول لحق الشعب الفلسطيني غير القابل للتصرف في تقرير المصير. ولا يفوتنا في هذا الصدد أن نرحب بالدول التي قامت بالاعتراف بدولة فلسطين الشقيقة يوم أمس في المؤتمر الدولي رفيع المستوى بشأن التسوية السلمية لقضية فلسطين وتطبيق حل الدولتين، فهذه خطوات محمودة وشجاعة وتنسجم مع القانون الدولي والحق. وختاما، فإن مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية وهو يؤكد تضامنه الراسخ مع الشعب الفلسطيني ووقوفه مع كل دولة تتعرض للعدوان، يشدد في الوقت ذاته على أن هذه الجرائم لا تمس الفلسطينيين وحدهم بل تمثل تهديدا للأمن الإقليمي والدولي برمته، وأننا نطالب هذا المجلس بأن يترجم أقواله إلى أفعال عبر خطوات عملية لوقف العدوان فورا وضمان وصول المساعدات الإنسانية فورا وحماية المدنيين وإنهاء الاحتلال غير القانوني والجائر، وإلا فلن نرى الأمن والأمان. وهدفنا الأسمى اليوم وكل يوم هو السلام. إن دماء الشعب الفلسطيني قد سالت بما فيه الكفاية، وأرواح الأبرياء زهقت بما فيه الكفاية، فالصمت لم يعد خيارا، والمسؤولية الآن تقع على عاتق المجتمع الدولي بأسره لخلق المسار والمناخ نحو حل الدولتين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I thank His Highness Sheikh Al-Sabah for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Abul-Gate, Secretary-General of the League of Arab States.
سيد الرئيس، لقد صار واضحاً أن آلة الحرب الإسرائيلية لا يمكن وقفها بالمناشدات وحدها، إذ تجرد قادة الاحتلال الذين أسكرتهم أوهام العنصرية وضلالات التطرف الديني والقومي من كل معاني الإنسانية والأخلاق. المطلوب اليوم هو إجراءات عقابية صارمة ترسل الرسالة الصحيحة بأن العالم اليوم لا يقبل أن تكون الإبادة الجماعية جزءاً من قاموسه. إننا نأسف أشد الأسف لعجز هذا المجلس مرة بعد مرة وآخرها منذ أيام عن وضع حد لحرب الإبادة التي تشنها إسرائيل على غزة، والتي فقدت اليوم حتى المنطق العسكري المجرد. إن لها في أي وقت مثل هذا المنطق. إن استخدام طرف دائم العدوية لحق الفيتو للمرة السادسة لمنع خروج أو إصدار قرار بوقف فوري للحرب هو تشجيع لقادة الاحتلال بالاستمرار في ارتكاب الجرائم والفظائع إلى أجل غير معلوم. ما تشهده غزة غير مسبوق في الوحشية والبربرية، ولكن أهدافه صارت واضحة. الهدف هو محو المجتمع الفلسطيني من الوجود وتهجير السكان إلى خارج القطاع بعد جعل كل أرضه غير صالحة للحياة. وأقول بكل وضوح أن الرضوخ لهذه الخطة الوحشية والجنونية يفقد المجلس كثيرا من شرعيته ويقوض دوره في حفظ السلم والأمن الدوليين. فما يجري في غزة لن يبقى في غزة، والخطة التي تباشرها إسرائيل بلا هوادة لإعادة احتلال القطاع وتشريد سكانه سوف يكون من شأنها زعزعة الأمن الإقليمي بأسره وتوسيع دائرة الصراع وخلق بؤر مستمرة للتوتر والعنف. لقد آن لهذا المجلس أن يتخذ القرار الصائب أخلاقياً والصحيح عملياً بوقف هذه الحرب التي دخلت إلى دائرة الجنون ولم يعد لها منطق سوى الانتقام الأعمى من مليوني فلسطيني معظمهم من النساء والأطفال. فلنوقف هذه الحرب اليوم قبل الغد ونشرع فوراً في إعادة إعمار غزة وإعادة أطفالها الذين تركوا مدارسهم لعامين إلى طفولتهم المستحقة. هذه الكلمات تنقل عن وزيرة خارجية بريطانيا. إعادة هذه القضية إلى مسارها الصحيح هو حل الدولتين الذي لا بديل عنه لإحلال سلام مستدام وإنهاء دورات العنف. العنف سيتكرر حتما في المستقبل إن ساد منطق الانتقام الأعمى الذي يتأسس على الاستعلاء العنصري. أقول بصوت عال سيادة الرئيس: كفى، وقفوا نزيف الدم والقتل الذي لطخ كل الإنسانية. إنها مسؤولية هذا المجلس أمام التاريخ. شكرا جزيلا.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Abdelgate for the statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Kaja Kallas, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission.
Dear President, Excellencies, if a military solution were possible in Gaza, Israel's war on Hamas would already be over and the hostages would have been released. Instead, the war continues and the famine has set in, a famine that was avoidable had aid been let in. We have a collective responsibility to change this situation. And so I repeat here the calls for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages and humanitarian aid into Gaza at scale. Europe has been the most active global actor in Gaza. We are the largest humanitarian donor. We have helped the Palestinians more than any other. We negotiated with the Israeli government a humanitarian understanding with specific benchmarks. Since then, more trucks have entered Gaza, more aid was delivered, the Jordanian and Egyptian routes were reopened, and repairs to critical infrastructure were carried out. In August, a ship carrying 1,200 tons of aid departed from Limassol, Cyprus. Further shipments will continue. But we all know it's not enough. That is why the European Union is pulling other levers to try and push the Israeli government to change its course of action. We recently proposed sanctions on extremist ministers in the Israeli government, sanctions on violent settlers in the West Bank and entities supporting their impunity, additional sanctions on Hamas terrorists, and the suspension of trade concessions with Israel. This is a message to current Israeli government: change course and address the humanitarian suffering. In addition, another fundamental question hangs over us: how to square Israel's legitimate right to live in safety and security with the future Palestinian state. We have always believed that there is one answer: two states side by side. As we saw during yesterday's conference, the weight of the world is behind the two-state solution. The European Union has worked hard to make this possible. The European Union is also the leading supporter of the Palestinian Authority. We will provide €1.6 billion over the next 3 years. We also kept Palestinian institutions functioning during this war, including education. We have now launched a forum to finance the future for the Palestinian people, the Palestine Donor Forum. And the Global Alliance remains the best mechanism for the discussions on how to turn commitments into actions. There must be a turning point in this war, and it cannot be in the expense of either the viability of a Palestinian state or the legitimate concerns of Israel. We have the power to change the course of this conflict, to see the release of remaining hostages, to prevent further civilian suffering, and see an end to this war. Thank you.
Her Excellency Ms. Kallas for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Nu Yilmaz, Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am delivering this statement on behalf of Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the member states belonging to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in my capacity as the chair of the group. Mr. President, let me express our appreciation to you for convening this meeting, which is taking place at a very auspicious occasion of the 80th annual session of the UN General Assembly. There is no doubt that the unprecedented crisis and the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory, including Al-Quds al-Sharif, has further deteriorated with the continued Israeli onslaught against Palestinian people. Prior to the recent official confirmation of the Israeli genocide in the occupied Palestinian territory by the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry, the OIC group has also decried the unprecedented humanitarian consequences of the long-drawn Israeli military onslaught in Gaza and elsewhere in the occupied Palestinian territory. It has also invited the attention of this hallowed council to the dangerous escalation of the war crimes and crimes against humanity perpetrated by the Israeli occupying power against the Palestinian people through the systematic targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, including the siege on, disruption of, and attack on food supply chains, water and medical facilities, among others. We note that the actions of the Israeli occupying power amount to ethnic cleansing, illegal blockade, the use of starvation as a weapon of war, and colonial settlement and apartheid policies, acts of settler colonialism and terrorism. Land confiscation and home demolition, including attacks on Islamic and Christian holy sites, are acts of genocide and crimes against humanity and constitute a grave violation of the historic status quo at the holy sites of Jerusalem. Consequently, we reaffirm the decision of the 21st Extraordinary Council of Foreign Ministers held in Jeddah, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, on 25 August 2025 on the significance of the case presented to the International Court of Justice on Israel's violation of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We, therefore, call on the Council to take the urgent measures to hold Israel accountable for these genocidal acts, including invoking Chapter 7 measures to bring a halt to the bloodshed and all of these crimes and to ensure the protection of the Palestinian people. Mr. President, while we had earlier condemned the Israeli military attack against Qatar on 9 September 2025, we consider the unjustified and illegal action on the part of the Israeli authorities as a desperate move to frustrate the global efforts to achieve a ceasefire and an end of the siege in Palestine. We commend the declaration by Qatar on the continuation of its mediation efforts along with Egypt towards securing a permanent, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire and an end to the war in Gaza. Consequently, we support the urgent implementation OIC reconstruction plan to allow for early recovery and reconstruction in the Gaza Strip, while rejecting forced displacement and ensuring that the Palestinian people remain in their land, and we encourage all member states to participate actively in the international conference in Cairo aimed at mobilizing political and financial support for the plan. In the same vein, we commend member states of the United Nations and the citizenry of the world for their overwhelming support for the legitimate cause of the Palestinian people, for their inalienable rights, including to return to self-determination, to the independence of the State of Palestine, and the implementation of the two-state solution. To this end, we hail the recent adoption of the New York Declaration on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution through an overwhelming vote at the General Assembly on 12 September 2025. And commend actions by many states towards the recognition of the State of Palestine and bringing an end to this illegal occupation and ensuring the realization of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and the achievement of a just and lasting solution. We reiterate that the time has come for the Council to assume its duties for the maintenance of international peace and security, including by approving the admission of the State of Palestine as a full-fledged member of the United Nations. We reiterate that the pathway to the resolution of the prolonged and historic injustice is the restoration of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to their national homeland, the implementation of the ICJ advisory opinion, as well as the relevant UN resolutions on question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution. That is the key to peace and security in the Middle East and in our world. I thank you all.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Yilmaz for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
خالص الشكر. السيد رئيس مجلس الأمن، سادة أعضاء مجلس الأمن، نرحب بالإحاطة التي قدمها السكرتير العام اليوم لمجلس الأمن ونشكره على جهوده الحثيثة لإحلال السلام في المنطقة. السيد الرئيس، لقد سعت مصر منذ اليوم الأول لإنهاء الحرب في قطاع غزة ليقينها بأن خروج الأمور عن السيطرة سيدخل المنطقة في أتون مرحلة غير مسبوقة من عدم الاستقرار. ولقد أثبتت الأيام صحة هذه التقديرات، فقد وجهت جهود إنهاء الحرب بتعنت غير مبرر من جانب إسرائيل في أكثر من موضع دون الوصول إلى نهاية توقف الحرب وتحقن الدماء. سيد الرئيس، لم تعد النوايا الإسرائيلية تجاه غزة والقضية الفلسطينية مستترة، إذ باتت التصريحات والتحركات الإسرائيلية تكشف عن توجه حقيقي نحو إعادة هندسة الوجود الفلسطيني في غزة، وهو ما يتضمن تهجير جزء كبير من السكان عبر العمليات العسكرية والتجويع وعبر القضاء على مقومات الحياة في غزة. وتأتي العملية العسكرية البرية الراهنة لاقتحام مدينة غزة في إطار تنفيذ هذا المخطط الخبيث، وهو ما تؤكد مصر رفضها التام له ولكل ما ينتج عنه من آثار. فمثل هذه الإجراءات تفتقر إلى أي سند قانوني أو أخلاقي، وتهدد السلام القائم منذ قرابة 5 عقود بشكل لا يمكن تصور مخاطره على كافة دول المنطقة. سيد الرئيس، سادة أعضاء مجلس الأمن، لقد وصلت الأوضاع الإنسانية في قطاع غزة إلى مرحلة كارثية، وذلك جراء العراقيل العديدة التي تضعها إسرائيل لعرقلة إدخال المساعدات وعرقلة عمل الأونروا ومنظمات الأمم المتحدة والمنظمات الإنسانية داخل القطاع. إن هذه الإجراءات أنتجت وضعاً مأساوياً غير مسبوق، ودفعت بأهل غزة إلى المجاعة. ولقد جاءت نتائج التقرير الخاص بلجنة التحقيق الدولية المستقلة التابعة للأمم المتحدة قاطعة في تأكيد ارتكاب إسرائيل لجريمة الإبادة الجماعية وثبوت وقوع ركنيها المادي والمعنوي ضد المدنيين في قطاع غزة. وإذاء هذه الأوضاع الكارثية تعاملت مصر بحكمة بالغة، فلم تنجر إلى مهاترات ولم تسعى إلى تصعيد الأمور بشكل يؤدي إلى المزيد من التدهور، ولكنها حرصت على تجنب العديد من الاستفزازات ليقينها بأن وقف إطلاق النار هو الخطوة الأولى المطلوبة لإطلاق مسار سياسي يؤدي إلى نزع فتيل الأزمة وبداية نقاشات جادة حول مستقبل غزة ومستقبل القضية الفلسطينية ككل. وتؤكد مصر عزمها على الاستمرار في هذه الجهود مع باقي الوسطاء حتى يتحقق هذا الهدف النبيل. سيد الرئيس، تعتزم مصر أيضا استضافة مؤتمر حول التعافي المبكر وإعادة الأعمار في قطاع غزة فور التوصل إلى وقف إطلاق النار، لحشد الدعم اللازم لتنفيذ الخطة العربية الإسلامية لإعادة أعمار غزة بأيد فلسطينية والتصدي لمخططات التهجير. ولتكن مهمتنا الرئيسية جميعا تمكين القرار الوطني الفلسطيني من الاطلاع بترتيبات إدارة القطاع بما يحافظ على وحدة الأرض الفلسطينية من قطاع غزة للضفة الغربية، بما في ذلك القدس الشرقية المحتلة تحت سلطة واحدة وحكومة واحدة وقانون واحد وسلاح واحد. سيد الرئيس، سادة أعضاء مجلس الأمن، لقد بات يقينا لدى الجميع أن الترتيبات الأمنية على الأرض وإنهاء الوضع الكارثي الراهن في غزة وإعادة الأعمار هي خطوات حتمية وضرورية لا يمكن أن تتم عمليا على الأرض إلا في إطار أفق سياسي نحو تسوية شاملة وعادلة للقضية الفلسطينية على أساس حل الدولتين وتجسيد الدولة الفلسطينية وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية على خطوط 4 يونيو 1967، وهو ما يجب أن يقترن بإرادة دولية صادقة وداعمة لإحلال السلام والاستقرار في الشرق الأوسط.
I now give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Mariam bint Ali bin Nasser Al Misnad, Minister of State for International Cooperation of Qatar.
السيد الرئيس، في البداية نعرب عن شكرنا لسعادة وزير خارجية جمهورية كوريا على عقد هذا الاجتماع، ونشكر سعادة الأمين العام على بيانه ونؤكد انضمامنا إلى بيان المجموعة الإسلامية. السيد الرئيس، يشهد هذا الشهر وخاصة خلال الأسبوع الرفيع المستوى تبلور إجماع دولي غير مسبوق حول دعم التسوية السلمية للقضية الفلسطينية وحل الدولتين استناداً إلى القانون الدولي وقرارات الشرعية الدولية. وقد تجلى هذا في كلمات رؤساء الدول والحكومات أمام المناقشة العامة للجمعية العامة، وفي المؤتمر الوزاري الذي عقد يوم الاثنين برئاسة المملكة العربية السعودية وفرنسا، وشاركت فيه دولة قطر على أعلى مستوى، حيث أعلنت عدة دول اعترافها بدولة فلسطين استكمالاً للتوجه الدولي نحو إنهاء أطول القضايا العالقة في الأمم المتحدة. كما تجسد هذا الإجماع في قرارات الجمعية العامة العديدة، وآخرها القرار بشأن مشاركة دولة فلسطين، وكنا نأمل أن ينضم مجلس الأمن إلى هذا التوافق عبر اعتماد مشروع القرار المقدم من الدول المنتخبة. فهذا المجلس بموجب ولايته الأساسية يتحمل المسؤولية كاملة عن اتخاذ الإجراءات الكفيلة بوقف الكارثة الإنسانية في غزة ومنع الإبادة الجماعية والتهجير القسري، واعتماد قرار ملزم بموجب الفصل السابع لضمان امتثال إسرائيل لقراراته وفرض وقف فوري لإطلاق النار. السيد الرئيس، لقد أكدت التجربة أن الوساطة والدبلوماسية هما الطريق الوحيد لتسوية النزاعات، وقد حظيت الجهود المشتركة التي بذلتها دولة قطر مع جمهورية مصر العربية والولايات المتحدة بتقدير واسع، وأقر مجلس الأمن بأهميتها في قراره 2735/2024، غير أن هذه الجهود تعرضت لضربة غادرة عندما استهدفت غارة جوية إسرائيلية منطقة سكنية في الدوحة بتاريخ 9 سبتمبر الجاري. يسكن هذه المنطقة 5000 من الأشخاص المدنيين من المواطنين والمقيمين، وقتل في هذه الغارة الشخص الذي ينتمي إلى قوات الأمن الداخلي الأخوية بدر الدوسري البالغ من العمر 22 عاماً، وإصابة 18 آخرين. إن الاعتداء على دولة وسيطة لا يعد فقط انتهاكاً صارخاً لسيادتها وللقانون الدولي الإنساني وميثاق الأمم المتحدة، بل هو اعتداء مباشر على مبدأ انتهاك صارخاً لسيادتها والقانون الدولي الإنساني كخيار لحل النزاعات. ومن هنا فإن حماية الوسطاء والمفاوضين ليست قضية سياسية فحسب، بل هي ركيزة أساسية لصون السلم والأمن الدوليين. وجاء التضامن الدولي في دولة قطر واضحاً سواء من خلال بيان مجلس الأمن الصادر في 11 سبتمبر أو في القمة العربية الإسلامية التي انعقدت في الدوحة، والتي شددت على أن الهجوم يشكل تهديداً خطيراً لأمن المنطقة وتقويضاً لفرص السلام وجهود التهدئة. إن انتهاكات إسرائيل للقانون الدولي الإنساني في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة تتواصل بشكل ممنهج، فمن استهدف المدنيين واستخدم التجويع كسلاح وتدمير البنى التحتية والمستشفيات إلى التهجير القسري والتهديد بالضم غير المشروع للضفة الغربية والتوسع الاستيطاني متكررة على المقدسات الإسلامية والمسيحية، كلها تمثل انتهاكات صريحة للقانون الدولي وتهديداً مباشراً لحل الدولتين. كما أن الاعتداءات الإسرائيلية المتكررة على أراضي دول الجوار مثل سوريا لبنان تقوض الاستقرار وتزيد من احتمالات اتساع دائرة الصراع، وما يجعل تهديدها للسلم والأمن الدوليين مسؤولية عاجلة تقع على عاتق هذا المجلس. إن السلام العادل والشامل والدائم في الشرق الأوسط لن يتحقق بتجاهل الحقوق المشروعة للشعب الفلسطيني أو عبر فرض الأمر الواقع بالقوة، بل بالالتزام بمبادرة السلام العربية وقرارات الشرعية الدولية ذات الصلة. ومن هذا المنبر ندعو المجتمع الدولي وخاصة مجلس الأمن إلى تحمل مسؤولياته القانونية والأخلاقية واعتماد خطوات عملية لوضع جدول زمني ملزم لإنهاء الاحتلال الإسرائيلي وضمان الاعتراف الكامل بدولة فلسطين على حدود عام 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. ختاماً السيد الرئيس، ندعو الأمم المتحدة إلى تفعيل آلياتها كافة من أجل وقف إطلاق النار فوراً في قطاع غزة، ضمان الدخول غير المشروط للمساعدات الإنسانية ورفع الحصار، حماية الوسطاء وجهود الوساطة كأداة أساسية لحل النزاعات والسلام، والعمل على تحقيق تسوية سياسية نهائية على أساس حل الدولتين بما يكفل الأمن والاستقرار الدوليين. وشكراً.
I thank Her Excellency Mrs. R. Misnad for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Saudi Arabia.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد الرئيس، أصحاب السعادة، أعضاء المجلس، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يعاني قطاع غزة من واقع كارثي يتفاقم يوماً بعد يوم على كافة المستويات نتيجة تصعيد عسكري غير مسبوق وغياب أي أفق سياسي فعال، مما أدى إلى انهيار مقومات الحياة والأمن. فالعدوان المتواصل والحصار المفروض منذ سنوات جعل من قطاع غزة نقطة توتر مركزية تشكل تهديداً لاستقرار المنطقة بأكملها وخطراً حقيقياً للسلم والأمن في المنطقة والعالم. إن تكرار الاعتداءات والانتهاكات الإسرائيلية التي تتناقض مع مبادئ القانون الدولي وميثاق الأمم المتحدة بالأعراف الدولية إنما جاء بسبب تعطيل آليات المحاسبة والعقاب وعجز مجلس الأمن والمجتمع الدولي عن ردع المعتدي وإيقاف انتهاكاته. لقد بلغت الأوضاع حداً بالغ الخطورة، ينذر بتفريغ مبدأ السيادة الوطنية من معناه، ويهدد مصداقية هذه المنظمة وأسس الشرعية الدولية، ويقوض الحلول الدبلوماسية والتفاوضية، ويشكل خطراً داهماً لأمن المنطقة والعالم. السيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، لقد طرحنا أمام أنظار مجلسكم الموقر خطورة الوضع في غزة وتداعيات النهج العدواني للسلطات الإسرائيلية في الشرق الأوسط، وتمسكها بتوسيع رقعة الصراع الإقليمي خلال السنوات الماضية، ودفعها بدول المنطقة نحو مسار مظلم يسوده العبث والكراهية والحروب على حساب تحقيق الأمن والسلم والتعايش بين شعوبها. وما زلنا نشهد تداعيات عدم اتخاذ الإجراءات الحاسمة لردع الانتهاكات الإسرائيلية وتطاولها على مبادئ القوانين والأعراف السائدة بين أعضاء المجتمع الدولي، وتمادي هجماتها الأحادية دون هوادة. فهل يقبل المنطق السليم أن يتم استهداف أراضي قطر الشقيقة وانتهاك سيادتها في ظل جهودها الحديثة في الوساطة لإنهاء الحرب؟ إن ما نشهده بشكل متكرر هو إصرار الطرف الإسرائيلي على قطع الطريق أمام أي فرصة لإيجاد حل سلمي يوقف إراقة الدماء ويضع حداً لمعاناة المدنيين ويقي المنطقة أثر التصعيد المستمر وآفة الحروب. السيد الرئيس، أمام هذا الواقع نجدد مطالبتنا بأن يطلع هذا المجلس بمسؤولياته التي أنشئ من أجلها، وأن يفعل إجراءات المحاسبة الدولية الرادعة ضد العبث والتهور الإقليمي للحكومة الإسرائيلية، صوناً للسلم والأمن الإقليمي والدولي، وحفاظاً على ما تبقى من مصداقية سلطات النظام الدولي وشرعيته. إن التحرك الدولي الفوري والجاد بات ضرورة لا تحتمل التأجيل من أجل وقف العدوان وإنهاء الحصار، تحديد الطريق نحو السلام الشامل والعادل عبر تنفيذ حل الدولتين وقيام الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة على حدود 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. وشكرا السيد الرئيس، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
I thank the representative of Saudi Arabia for the statement. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give them the floor.
Mr. President, I must take the floor to respond to my Palestinian colleagues. As Ambassador Waltz noted, the Palestinian Authority has failed to meet its own Oslo commitments, to renounce terrorism and violence, and to resolve issues through direct negotiations with Israel. These are not falsehoods, but facts. We call on the Palestinian Authority to halt its pushes for the unilateral recognition of statehood. Instead, they must focus on actions that will not empower Hamas, but rather create a better future for the people of Palestine. We reiterate again that all hostages, living and deceased, must be released immediately. Thank you.
Representative of the United States. There are no more names inscribed on the list of the speakers. The meeting is adjourned.